And so one of the things I like to say is that I feel like it's one of the most, like a sales point, a sales pitch point that I give to people is it's the most appropriate art for the times we live in.
Yeah.
It expresses, I think, how most people feel more than any other art form I could think of, at least visual art form, because everyone's feeling anxiety and
Yeah.
fear and hopelessness,
Yeah.
and like everything's out of control. And it's like, this is the time for us. That's why I tell all the other dark artists, this is our time. So
Yeah.
you got to make some great art.
Welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio, exploring the frontiers of spirituality, consciousness, the esoteric, and humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth.
I'm your host, Nick Mather, and in this episode, I am joined by artist Chet Zar to discuss the book Dystopia Volume 1, a field guide to the dark universe of Chet Zar. In a wide-ranging conversation, Chet and I talk about dark art and its importance during these dark times, living in haunted places, the spiritual vision behind his work, some of his artistic influences, and so much more. Also, please be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you use to listen or view podcasts. And please consider sharing it with friends and family. Your support is truly appreciated. Chet Zar is an American artist known for his dark visual art, designing and creating creatures and makeup effects for such films as The Ring, Hellboy 1 and 2, Darkman, Planet of the Apes, and the critically acclaimed music videos for the art metal band Tool. At the suggestion of horror author Clive Barker, Chet left the film industry to focus on his own original works and try his hand at fine art, specifically painting in oils. The 2015 documentary, Chet Zar, I Like to Paint Monsters, directed by Mike Correll, examined Chet's life and career. Chet's work was also chronicled in the book Black Magic, The Art of Chet Zar, and the recently published Dystopia Volume 1, a field guide to the dark universe of Chet Zar. Chet, welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm really looking forward to this. This is going to be a little bit of a different podcast episode for me, I think.
Oh, good.
So it'll be a challenge, but it's one that I'm looking forward to. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
I feel like I sort of cross over that into the like spirituality realm and also the art realm, and they're usually two different worlds. But I'm more in the art world, but I also have like a lot of crazy experiences that have happened to me throughout my life, and I feel like as or even more at home in that talking about that sort of thing, spiritual stuff, however, paranormal, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, since you mentioned it, let's dig into that, because you bring that up in the documentary, I Like to Paint Monsters. And there does, looking at your artwork, it does come across, there does seem to be a sort of spiritual aspect to it. So maybe talk a little bit about this. I know in the film you mentioned that you lived in a couple of haunted houses, you've had out-of-body experiences, you talk about the ability to manifest visualizations. So let's explore that a little bit, and we can start wherever you would like to start.
Yeah, that's where do you start? It's a family thing. It started off as a family thing. My mom was always seeing ghosts. My sister used to see ghosts a lot. When I was a little kid, there was, we lived in two haunted houses. One I don't remember because I was a baby, but the other one, it was like normal for us. It was because my mom was she was really cool. She was kind of a new ager, sort of, into hypnosis and manifestation. She taught me that stuff when I was really young. So she was always accepting of it. She was never afraid of it. She didn't think it was satanic or weird or anything like that. It was sort of like exciting and interesting. And so when it would be kind of like, hey, check out what happened to me. My mom would tell me this just happened, and it was like, oh, cool. It was very different. So it was just kind of normal in the house I was growing up in.
What would be some of the kinds of experiences?
One time, there were so many, it's kind of hard to to think, but the one that does come to mind was that my mother was taking folded clothes into my brother's room, and she opened his door and he shut it on her and said sorry and shut the door in her face. And she was like, that was weird. And she turned around and walked down the hall, and he was just coming in the front door.
Wow.
Another family story is how my sister got mad at my mom for poking her with knitting needles. And my mom's like, I didn't poke you with knitting needles, but those knitting needles over there, not stabbed her, but like poked her with them. Those are two pretty good ones. There's so many of them though. I mean, there was this is weird. My mom and her best friend saw a ship's captain in our kitchen standing there. And it turns out the guy who owned the house was like the captain of a ship in the Navy. They found out later, one of those weird things. So it was just all around all the time.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I lived in a couple of haunted apartments. So
really, haunted. Never hear that term, haunted apartment.
Yeah, it
makes sense though.
Pardon?
It makes sense. Why not? Haunted house, haunted apartment, haunted store. I've heard of haunted antique stores.
Right. Yeah. Well, one of these was in Denver. It was an old Victorian house.
Oh, wow.
And converted to, I think, like 4 apartments.
Mm-hmm.
That was one. And then the very first apartment I had in Los Angeles was right down by Wilshire and Fairfax.
Oh,
and
okay.
It was an old hotel.
Oh, wow.
Converted into apartments. And that one was kind of scary. I still have dreams about that one, especially the basement where the washer and dryer for the tenants were. That shows up in my nightmares a lot.
Wow. What happened to you? Like, what, do you have any good?
Yeah, well, things would like disappear. I couldn't find them, like keys, and so I'd have to call out, I'd like this back, and then they show up. But the 2 main things that occurred was I was sitting in my living room watching TV one evening, and I had cats. I had 2 cats. And there was this like small hallway leading into the bedroom, and in the hallway was a closet, and there was no door. And I had in the top shelf a camera bag. It was a 35 millimeter camera. And it had been sitting there for like 7 or 8 months. Right. So it was firmly placed. And one of my cats was sitting in front of that closet opening, just howling. And all of a sudden that camera bag jettisoned out.
Whoa.
It did not fall. It wasn't like a tumble. It was as if it were thrown.
Wow, that's scary.
Yeah. And then one morning I saw a disembodied hand coming out of a closet.
No way. That's really good.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was sitting outside. This is when I was still kind of bad and was smoking, but I was sitting outside one Friday night and having some wine and smoking a cigarette, and some people that lived in the building. There was like a couple across from me and then a guy down the hall. They kind of crossed paths and they started talking, and very shortly they started talking about the experiences that they were having.
Oh, wow.
And, I kind of heard it and then joined it. And we all were having very similar sorts of things. And apparently the apartment at the very front of the building, they could not keep people in there.
Wow.
But they and within 3 or 4 months, they'd be gone.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So I'm always interested in those sorts of things.
Yeah. It's so interesting.
Yeah. So did that influence, I would imagine, the path you took with your artwork?
Strangely enough, it doesn't feel related, as crazy as that sounds, because that stuff, like I said, was sort of normal. I guess I'm sure it influenced me because it was part of my upbringing in a way. But my brother and sister aren't into this stuff like I am. They're not into like monsters and horror movies, not even. So, and they grew up in the same environment. So it just feels, I always liken it to being like, it feels genetic. It just feels, it's like, like anything. It's just like, it feels genetic. I don't know if it is, but it feels like just kind of who I am, and I don't know why I've got theories, but I just this stuff makes me happy. This kind of stuff, I think it's cool. I just like it. It makes me feel good. That's why a lot of times I'll get criticism from people who don't understand dark art, from other artists maybe saying, why I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. I'd feel depressed all the time. And it's like, no, 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 you don't get it. This is like, when you paint a sunset, this is like my version of a sunset for whatever reason. I just think it's so beautiful and it makes me feel good. It makes me happy. I know it's weird, but I don't, I'm a nice guy. I'm a decent person. So it's like, who cares? As long as you're not doing anything bad with it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think it's weird. I actually really appreciate it. And I don't. One of the things that came up, and this is jumping way ahead, but we can just let the conversation flow.
Yeah.
In the Dystopia book, looking at this collection of art, and I do want to get into kind of what led to the publication of this, but there are themes that kind of jumped out at me.
Oh, okay,
And
cool.
there are themes of one. What's really clear is, I think you have this usage of gas masks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that always invokes World War One.
Mm.
And then it seems to be things from World War II in the clothing
Right.
and whatnot. And I think there's even something from the Civil War in one of the pictures.
Yeah, there is.
And so this idea of war seems to be in there.
That's true.
And
unintentionally so, but true.
Yeah. And then there's, like the smokestacks and like this pollution. And the impression I get when I look at these is that it's someone who is living in a hostile, violent, polluted world.
Is that familiar?
Yeah. And is like, I can't let this eat at me. I need to get it out.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's just the impression I get when I look at the artwork. Not that it's a dark or dangerous or anything like that, but it's almost like this primal scream of the world that we're living in. Like, this is madness.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's it's cool to hear that, because I'm sure you read it in the introduction that my artwork's always been just totally intuitive. That really comes from when I left the film industry and I started painting. It's like it was so important for me to be pure and real as an artist, because I came out of this commercial art background in the film industry, and it was like, make things look cool to a 10-year-old boy because this is our demographic, and make this 13% less scary, and just stuff that as an artist you just go, oh, that hurts, because you're trying to make something amazing, designing creatures and stuff. And so leaving the industry and doing my own work was like, okay, now I can do what I want to do, what's true, what's real, what's pure. Because I think every artist, every creative person, every writer wants to, capture the truth, wants to be real, wants to not be contrived. And that's kind of the ultimate goal, I think. And so I was like, I'm going to just, what do I paint? So I'm going to go back to when I was the most pure, which was my childhood. And when I used to just draw for the fun of it. Naturally, no one was telling me you have to draw. It's not about selling a piece or making a political point or anything. It was like, you're doing it for the joy of doing it. And so I thought that was my most pure time of my life and most people's lives when they're kids. So I was like, okay, I'm going to paint monsters. And in 2000, there's just like, no one was into it. There was not a market for it, but I was, again, in the documentary, it talks about the Joseph Campbell follow your bliss theory. I was like, I believe this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to try it. And if it's true, and I know it's true, but I haven't tested it really yet. And if it's true, then this is my test. And so as far as I'm concerned, I proved that the theory is true, at least to myself, because I did that with this really unlikely thing that was my bliss. And it did work for me. So I don't know how we got on that. I don't remember what the initial question was, but interpreting the artwork. Yeah. So it's intuitive, because I try and get in the state of mind as a kid. I try to approach creating work like I did when I was a kid, which is just do it and have fun and just not think about the meaning or anything. But that doesn't mean that meaning is not there. It's like, it's more of a fun, it's a way for me to look inside of my subconscious
Right.
that most people don't have access to that stuff very easily. But when you just paint intuitively, you're being told something,
Hmm.
and so it's always a surprise, like, oh yeah, I do kind of think that way, or ooh, I do feel that way. I never really thought about it.
Right.
But you mentioning that, living in a state of war and with pollution coming out of the smokestacks, it's like, I grew up in the 70s.
Right.
I remember seeing the end of Vietnam on TV on the newscasts, and I remember pollution. I remember my chest hurting. I'm talking like 70. I'm going to be 55 in November, so mid 70s, before all the they really took on pollution and smog. And man, I'd come in from playing every day, my chest would hurt so bad. It was like a normal thing for kids. And
Yeah.
so, and you remember, I don't know how old you are, but there was more it was a thing in the 70s that, like, we're destroying the world. There was commercials on TV that was trying to get people to, like, not litter and stuff like that. So that's, but it's also that's still the world we're living in, even more so.
Yeah. No, I just turned 55. So,
Oh, okay, great.
yeah.
Wow,
So,
I didn't realize we're the same age.
67, man.
Hell yeah. Summer of love.
Yeah.
Isn't that 60, or is that 69?
Yeah. And
67?
Yeah. And so my birthday's September 9th. So technically I was born during the summer of love.
All right.
And I've had people try to say, no, September's fall. And I'm like, no.
No.
And
Not in California.
Yeah. So some Gen X solidarity.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember, I mean, my hometown, I'm not from California, but I remember my hometown, the house I lived in, we were just like 2 blocks from the power plant.
Mm-hmm.
And it was coal powered power plant.
Wow.
And I remember, and the city stinks, because, or it stank or whatever, because of the coal and the pollution. But I remember as a kid just sitting there and watching these sort of black ribbons of smoke coming out.
Yeah.
Of the sky,
Yeah. What's weird too is during the filming of the documentary, like up until the documentary, I'd been painting for probably 10 years. And I had still not even really thought about what I was doing or any meanings, but going through, the whole process of going through your life and talking to someone about it's the first time I ever did it in front of a camera, especially. You have to, like, just analyze things more. I'm more of like an intuitive kind of person. I just kind of go with it. But so I had to really kind of sit and look at things. And I remember one time driving down to San Pedro, where I grew up, seeing the big smokestack on the oil refinery that's right in Pedro. It's like a big smokestack that says San Pedro on it. And it's like, oh wow, I've been painting those smokestacks for 10 years and not even thinking about it. It's that smokestack. It's the same looking smokestack. It's such a trip.
Yeah. Well, and I remember in the documentary as well that I think it was your mom that pointed out, and they were showing, I assume that they were your actual artwork from when you were a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But I think your mom said that some of the earliest things that you were drawing were like images of war, like planes and war. So that seems like it's something that has carried through.
Yeah. I mean, I remember one of my earliest memories is seeing, I think it was the Vietnam War, but it could have been old war footage, but seeing a person like getting shot with a machine gun on the news. Wow. It was black and white, so maybe it was like World War II or something, but I still remember that. And just it was shocking. And I remember in the first grade, during art time, I painted a guy shooting another guy with blood coming out. 2 army guys. And I remember the teacher was like, people were going, and I don't know. It just seemed natural, a natural expression of, horror, I guess. It's probably why I'm not crazy is I was able to have that outlet to express these things, because everybody feels them.
Yeah, they do. And I think that's why it's so crucial and important. And I remember as a kid, I always liked the horror movies, and when you were talking, I was remembering we had to like create a book and illustrate a book in like 3rd or 4th grade. And mine was like a horror novel based on Friday the 13th, not the movie, but
right.
That hadn't been made yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. But I think, children probably know that, experiencing this world and seeing the horrors of it, I think is shocking. And we know
Yeah.
we have to get it out somehow.
Yeah. It's got to be expressed, or you can't ignore it. You can't deny it. It's that's why I think dark art is important. Horror movies are important.
Yeah.
Things like this, because horror is real.
Yeah.
There are horrors in life, and you just can't deny it. And if that's when the problems start, when you deny that there's horror and horrible things going on, or when you try to hide these things from yourself, these feelings that people have, and that's when it goes inward and starts causing like psychosis and OCD and weird compulsive behaviors and stuff.
Right.
People that have been abused that turn it inward, that don't get it out, end up being really screwed up.
Yeah. It would seem to me that since you're getting all of this out, that you probably have very few nightmares.
Yeah, I do. I don't have a ton of nightmares, actually. Although lately I, I have been, because I've been working every single day and not getting enough sleep. So that's more of like a physical issue, because I'm getting ready for a show. And I have noticed, like, man, I've been having these nightmares the last couple nights. But generally, no, I don't really,
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. I can imagine anxiety nightmares. I have those, and those are the worst.
Yeah. It's not even like I'm not stressed about it because I'm on schedule with this show. It's more like I got to get 8 hours of sleep,
Yeah.
or else it messes me up. That's when I have these out of bodies too,
Right.
is when my sleep schedule gets screwed up. It always happens then, and I'll just like randomly, as I'm falling asleep, start floating around, and it's weird. It's really weird, but it feels like it's like a physical thing, because I work every day. I don't take time off really that often, just because of the nature of my business. I have to keep hustling to make money, because it's hard to make money as an artist. So I find that I have to get 8 hours of sleep,
Right.
because I'm working all the time. And if I don't, things start getting weird.
Sure. Yeah. And in the film, you described your first out of body experience. And so this is a common experience for you that happens quite frequently.
Yeah, pretty often. I mean, I'll go a year, maybe not quite a year, but maybe 6 months. Other times, especially, like I said, especially if I'm on a deadline and I'm pulling all-nighters and my sleep hours get screwed up, I'll have them a lot. But yeah, it's happened, around, I think I was 12 years old, somewhere around there. It was a classic sleep paralysis, where a guy I couldn't move, and I was looking through my eyelids, but my eyes were closed, but I was totally aware. And this guy appeared next to me and started hitting me with the pillow. He was holding a pillow over his face and just hitting me over and over with the pillow. And this voice was telling me, he can't hurt you. He's just trying to scare you. And so, but I was still scared, terrified. And I kind of shook myself out of it. And then after that, a few years after that, I had one that was like the opposite, where I was floating around and I just felt like, wow, this is amazing. This is what it's like when you die. Like, I just knew for sure this is what it feels like when you die, because it felt like me without any fear or any kind of emotional baggage. It felt so good and free. And it was like, oh, this is my real self. This is how I really am. And it was me, but it was me without the negative stuff, and oddly enough, as an adult, when I eventually tried ecstasy, it felt exactly like being on ecstasy. And it was like I hadn't done anything at that point, because I was very anti-drug when I was a kid. But yeah, it was amazing. And then I was floating, but I couldn't control. That's one thing I have a hard time controlling it. And so I was just like floating around, and the room was completely dark, and I went through the wall. I could see in between the wall. And then it was early morning outside, really bright white, and it shocked me. And so I just went like back into my body, like a rubber band pulled me back in, just woke up.
Yeah. Wow. Have you ever read any of the works by, is it Robert Monroe?
Yeah. I've read a bunch of his stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious if if there was anything in those books that might help you in terms of the controlling.
There was actually. That's the one thing the main thing I got from Robert Monroe was that you have to think it to do it. So it's like, if you want to fly forward, you have to say, I want to fly forward. You have to think that, and then you'll fly forward. It's not like we're used to just going, it's, when I want to move my arm, I just do that. I don't think I'm going to move my arm, but in that state, you have to go, I want to move my arm forward, and then your arm will move forward, and it works. The problem is I can never remember to do it.
Yeah.
It's like you just forget. And then sometimes you go, oh yeah, and you remember. Or like sometimes I'll have them and it's just pitch black too. I can't see and I'm floating. And if I remember, I could say, oh, I want to see, and then I'll be able to see, and it's all good. But most of the time I'm just like, oh no, I'm floating around again.
Wow.
It's a trip. So it's a weird, it's like my, I don't know if you could call it a talent. It's not really a talent, but it's like my natural psychic ability or whatever you want, paranormal connection. Whereas, other people can like predict things, it's like mine is out of body experiences for what it's worth. It doesn't really do me any good, but that's where it goes for me.
Have you ever, has this always happened when you're trying to sleep, or have you ever practiced this while you're like fully awake?
Yeah, no, I've never been able to induce it. I've tried, but to be fair, I probably gave up, before I if I would have kept at it, I probably could have induced it. The only time I had kind of a spontaneous one was when I was working. I was 18. I was on my first big film job in Italy. I went to work on this horror movie. They sent me, it was like my first job. I was excited. I'd never been in a plane. I'd never been out of California. They fly me to Italy with this crew. And I was this little kid, in Italy. Just, it was super cool. But I was sitting in the shop where they build the stuff, and it was before we were shooting. And I had just discovered The Prophet, that book, The Prophet. And it was like, and I was kind of, very interested in spirituality even back then and things like that. And I was reading it sitting in a packing crate, because that's what it was. We were unpacking like the creature suits and stuff being shipped over from the United States. So there was a big packing crate with packing peanuts, and I was laying in there reading this book because it was a break or whatever. And I read this, I don't remember what passage was, but it was, how it is when you read an amazing passage of brilliant truth, you just go, oh my God, that's amazing, especially at that age. And I was like, whoa, that's amazing. And I just kind of closed my eyes and laid down, and I just immediately shot up through the ceiling and went way up, so far up. I couldn't see anything though. And it shocked me so much that I opened my eyes and I was back. So it was like this weird, spontaneous, I don't know, mystical experience that I felt like came from reading this passage of spiritual truth in this book. It was weird. So that was the only time that was different. That felt different to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever tried? I know that Robert Monroe, I think, suggested listening to like binaural beats.
Yeah, right.
But the thing that's really coming to my mind is shamanism, because one definition of a shaman is, they are experts at this.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
Out of body experiences, states of ecstasy.
Yeah.
And so have you ever listened to the binaural beats or shamanic drumming to try to elicit these things?
No, I haven't. But I was into shamanism for a while. I went with my mother-in-law, took me to go see, what's the big Western shaman guy from the 80s. It's like a famous guy. He was the
Michael
guy.
Harner?
Yeah, Michael Harner. Yeah, we went to go take one of his lectures. It was a workshop thing, and my mother-in-law was cool. She was into that stuff, and it was her idea. So we went up there and took that workshop, which was really fun. So there was a period where I was kind of looking into that and interested, and also, from having mystical psychedelic experiences got me interested in shamanism, because that's kind of what it is pretty much in the indigenous cultures. So I don't know, maybe if I was in an indigenous culture, I'd be a shaman. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, I think that, the term is a little problematic somewhat. There's a lot of debate about it, but
Yeah,
it
yeah.
seems to be, in my opinion, it's something that does seem to be worldwide. Um,
Right.
and,
Yeah.
I think it's part of our heritage, so.
Yeah, like our human heritage. But you think about how will it take shape in different cultures?
Right.
That's the problem with looking to cultures outside of our own and
Right.
kind of mimicking them, because it's like it doesn't really match up, but we have a version of it that's
Yeah.
essentially the same. I don't know what it is for Westerners. You probably know, but I haven't thought about it. But I'm sure there is a version of it that is more appropriate for Western people.
Yeah, you have to dig, and and that's one of the issues is that if the traditional, I'm putting air quotes around traditional spiritualities of a culture don't speak to you, you start
Right.
looking elsewhere.
Right.
And then there's always that potential of, cultural appropriation,
Or not even, or not understanding it properly because it's not your culture, so you don't know
Right.
the reference, really.
Yeah,
You know what I
right.
mean?
Right, exactly. But I think that there was something within human history that was kind of, especially again, quotes, Western culture that was eradicated.
Yeah,
So it
yeah,
has to be sort of reinvented,
yeah, that's true.
reclaimed. Where I would look is in, weirdly enough, in the pre-Socratic philosophers.
Hmm.
There's some really amazing books by this guy, Peter Kingsley.
Hmm.
One you might enjoy, it's called In the Dark Places of Wisdom.
Ooh, that sounds
Uh,
good. I'll have to write that down.
and what he describes are specifically, I think it's Parmenides and Empedocles. And what they would do is they would go into caves, and
Oh, wow.
it was called incubation. So they would go into caves in total darkness and just lie there
Wow.
and then have visions. It'd be a visionary experience.
Wow. What was it called? In the dark places of what?
In the Dark Places of Wisdom
Was
by Peter Kingsley. Yeah,
okay, cool.
yeah,
Try and find that on audiobook.
yeah. And he makes a really good case that all of this was actually informed from I think, like Siberian shamanism, which is
Wow.
where we get the term shaman from,
Right.
but
Yeah.
that has been lost, and
Hmm.
I'd personally like to reintroduce that into philosophy, because
Yeah.
that's where it ought to be.
Yeah, definitely.
You're probably going to get a lot more philosophy majors if you.
Yeah, right. Well, there's something to be said about, people are attracted to things that, or people are interested in. There's a reason people aren't interested in things is
Right.
because they don't resonate on a deeper level.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a hunger for people for these kinds of experiences.
Hmm.
You
Yeah,
know?
well, that's why you see, why you see like hippies and stuff doing the, dreadlocks and,
Right.
or the hippies in the 60s going over to India and it's like they were feeling that missing piece.
Yeah.
But again, I feel like it's like it's not a bad thing, but it's not going to make sense in the same way. It's just like gurus. The
Right.
idea of gurus sounds like horrible to Westerners, but in India, it's like a tradition. That's part of that tradition is you have to have a guru, and it's
Right.
a good thing. But here, you automatically think of a scammer or some kind of charlatan or someone trying to rip you off. It just
Yeah.
doesn't like translate into the two different cultures in the same way.
Right. Yeah. That's true. That's very, very, very true. So I wanted to ask, I want to kind of take a big step back in a way,
Sure.
just for the audience and for anyone who may not know. You've mentioned dark art.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So what do you mean by that? What is dark art?
That's a good question. You know, it's what everybody calls the kind of artwork that I do. This was one of the one of the realizations when we were making the documentary. It's like, because people who do artwork like I do, which is like monsters, stuff that's seems horror movie related or scary or creepy or macabre or gothic in that way, kind of gothy. Everyone all the artists in that scene, as long as I've been involved, have always been like trying to come up with a term as cool as like surrealism or something. So it's like dark surrealism or dark symbolism, or trying to come up with a cool term. But what we realized during the shooting of the documentary and interviewing all these people at tattoo shows, the tattoo people are number one dark art fans. They love it. That's normal to them in the same way it's normal to me. Is that everyone called it dark art, and so that was sort of the reason I wanted to call my podcast the Dark Art Society, is just to kind of normalize that name. It's like my attitude was everybody uses that name, so let's just embrace it and get on with the art and forget about a name, because names are just names. They don't matter. It's like the art makes the name cool. Just like, what are the impressionists? It's like, it sounds cool because you think of all those cool paintings and painters. But if you think of the word impressionist on its own, it's like, that's not like an amazing inspired name. It's not like the coolest name you could have thought of. So even surrealism, it's like surrealism is pretty cool. But still, it doesn't matter. So I've been like pushing, let's get beyond what the name is. Just accept it. It's dark art is like, it when you see it, kind of. It's dark. But it's also it's a wide umbrella term, the way I see it. It's like really good horror films like The Exorcist, or Blue Velvet, like David Lynch, Eraserhead. These things to me fall into like dark art,
Right.
But it's also on the other end of it, it's a heavy metal album cover with someone being dismembered, and it's kind of cheesy stuff. So there's a range of it, but and every artist has to every artist that does that kind of work has to find their place in that, and in my place is with monsters, but I'm also trying to I'm not trying to do it. I think naturally it kind of comes out that they are monsters that you often feel some kind of sympathy for, or empathy. You feel empathetic. You feel their pain in a way. So I try and have humanity in there. Monsters with kind of like a I don't know, with feeling. I paint monsters with feeling.
Yeah. And that's something else that makes me wonder. I think the most effective monsters are the ones that do have feelings, and maybe it's the feelings that make them monsters.
Yeah. Well, like I think it was Guillermo del Toro who was talking in an interview talking about Frankenstein, or maybe it wasn't him. I don't know. It was someone in an interview was talking about Frankenstein, how it's like, you feel bad for Frankenstein's monster,
right?
You feel bad for him. He's like an innocent victim in all of this, and the townspeople are the bad ones that are coming after him, the people that are afraid of him. So it's definitely the angle that it's how I feel about monsters. I don't know. I like the idea of being able to make people feel bad for the monster, not feel bad, but like, empathize with them and feel like, oh, that poor guy. That's kind of how I don't know, because I feel that way about people in general. It's like everybody has it so rough. It's like I really feel for people that are suffering. I guess that's one of the things. Dark art honors suffering. That was one of the quotes from the documentary, and I think that kind of says it well.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that with horror in general, there are the monsters who feel, and that we feel for, like Frankenstein's monster. But then there's this other kind of monster, which is the other,
right?
We set aside as completely non-human, completely
right,
and non-feeling. And I think a lot of the figures, like from the Halloween movies, and
Michael Myers and Jason from Friday the 13th. They're others, they're
Right.
killers,
It's like zombies, Night of the Living
Yeah.
Dead zombies,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. And Cthulhu, Cthulhu's so
Yeah.
radically other, but it seems like what is the most effective and the most important are the ones where it reminds us that we too can be monsters.
Yeah. Yeah. Or that, yeah, for sure. I mean, I was just thinking about that Twilight Zone episode, the monsters on Maple Street. I think that's, that one, that says it all, that, you turn off some lights, you make the cars stop working, and then everyone just like starts turning on each other. And, but at the same time, that's like, I think it's a big, like I said, it's a big subject. It's multifaceted. So yeah, it could almost be like a morality tale type situation where it's like, look at how horrible we are to each other. But at the same time, you could also be like, we all feel ugly like monsters. And that's more, I think, I don't know. I do like to paint the other sometimes, that feeling, that scary feeling that you have about the other, or the thing that scares you the most. But I like to connect with people through the artwork to where they may recognize that, oh, I feel that way. I have that feeling, I feel unloved or ugly sometimes. Everybody feels this way.
Yeah.
I think at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we do, just by virtue of being human.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, it's part of the human condition.
Yeah. Well, and it also, reminds me, when you're speaking here, of when you were talking about suffering and recognizing the suffering of all beings. That's very Buddhist.
Yeah. Right.
And in Tibetan art in particular, you have these very demonic figures.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. I've never even thought of that, but that's a good point.
Yeah. Well, and that's something that also came to mind when I was going through Dystopia. And I want to ask you about how that came into being, because I know that's a really interesting story.
Yeah, it's weird.
But, you begin by sort of mapping out sort of dystopia, and there's these like different realms, right?
Mhm.
At the center, please correct me if I'm wrong, but like at the center of it is what you called the void.
Mhm.
And when I was looking at this, and yeah, it's triangular in a way, that the way that this map is set up.
Mhm.
When I saw that, what really came to mind was the Tibetan tankas, because in the center of the Tibetan tanka that's where the divinity is.
Oh, wow.
And when you were looking at this sort of map of this imaginal realm, and there was that core center, and with the void, I also always think, that, and I think that, I don't remember where it was in the book, it may have been in the foreword or introduction, where it's described as pure chaos.
Yeah.
But pure chaos is where creativity comes from.
Right. Yeah. That's the weird thing. It's like, I don't know. I feel like I'm outside of it in a way, as much as you or anybody who reads the book. It's all a mystery to me. I'm just painting these paintings.
Right.
So that's what's kind of fun about it, is that I'm discovering it. I'm discovering it right before other people discover it, but I'm still discovering it myself, because it's not something I thought up. It's something that I painted into existence accidentally, in a way.
Right.
Yeah, or it's just a natural artifact of painting whatever I wanted to, whatever I thought was cool, and letting my own creative impulse lead the way, without any consideration to anything other than just enjoying myself and making paintings. And then this whole world, after 10 or 15 years, or however, I guess about 15 years, it's like, oh, I painted a world into existence that I had no idea. It was so weird. It was such a strange thing.
Yeah. And was that a realization that you came up with, or was it because the book, I think you worked together with the director again, Mike Carell?
Yeah.
Or is that something that, was like the two of you talking about the artwork, and, how did that realization come to pass, that you had created this world?
It was years of hearing people tell me, oh, your creatures look like they exist in the same place, or they look like they're related to each other.
Mm.
And it looks like a place. All of your paintings look like they're in some other place. And I never thought about it really, honestly, until until people started telling me that. And I would be like, oh yeah, that's cool. And then just not really think about it. And then I kept hearing it over and over. And then by the time we were doing this documentary, we were really faced with, what is dark art? What am I doing? Why am I painting this? Because we're making a movie about my life, I guess, and my career. So we had to be asking these questions, and I'd never thought about it. So I had to think about it for the first time. And I think just talking it through and hearing other people's reflections on my work through all the interviews he was doing for the documentary, it just seemed to naturally come out that I was sort of painting this world. I don't remember at what point it was a thing, but it just seemed to kind of naturally arise out of all of that. I do remember, I think the first person to really say something specifically like, you should make a book about the world you paint, was my friend Christopher Ulrich, who's an amazing visionary dark artist, like criminally underrated. You got to check his stuff out. He's really, you'll love it. It's super rich with like metaphor and myth, and it's so cool. It's amazing. But he was the first person that I remember saying, you should make a dungeon master guide of your characters.
And that's what it felt like. Was this is like Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, it's got everything except a point system.
Because it had like types and classes.
Yeah. And I grew up on that. I was a Dungeon and Dragon nerd when I was a kid. It's like that's part of my history. So yeah, and then there was a point. I don't know. There was a point where I don't know where I just thought, we'd kickstarted the documentaries. So it's like, hey, let's do a Kickstarter and make a book. And it turned out to be one of the worst mistakes of my life, because it just was so hard to put the book together. But, I'm happy that I did it now. But if I would have known it would have been so hard, I definitely wouldn't have done it. No way. Because I'm still delivering rewards to that Kickstarter 5 or 6 years later. It's terrible.
Yeah, it is a beautiful book. I mean, just the way, I don't know if you're familiar. There's a fellow on YouTube. He goes by Foolish Fish.
Yeah, I subscribe to him.
Okay.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah. So when I first,
I know, I want to hit him up. Actually, I want to have him review the book.
Yeah. That's actually when I first saw the book, he just kind of popped in the mind, and I'm like, oh, I want to do a Foolish Fish kind of review about how beautiful this book is.
Feel free. I do. I subscribe to something of his. I think his YouTube thing. I love his he's great. His whole magical journey. I don't know if you read his like mystical experience he had that got him on the path. It's really cool.
Yeah, I seem to remember something about him in a car ride.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Manifest the specific car.
I like it because he comes from a kind of traditional Christian theological background,
right?
But he gets it. He's not like a fundamentalist, because, I sort of come from that background myself. Like Western culture is, Judeo-Christian basically,
right.
but my mom, it's like Christianity was never, my mom was cool and liberal, and she was into like new thought and stuff,
right.
but it was like kind of Christian-y new thought. So it was like, Jesus was a cool character, a cool guy to me growing up. It's like, I always say my main exposure to Christianity was Jesus Christ Superstar. That was like the family's favorite movie. We watch it every year. And so I wasn't raised in a fundamentalist household where I just grew up hating religion in that way, or Christianity in that way. So I don't have that. I mean, of course, I'm not into this extreme thing that's going fascist right-wing thing that's going on now, but I like seeing people that are into alternative spiritualities and magic and the occult that are also don't have a problem with Christianity in the way that I don't. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
that's one of the things I like about him, is he's like, that's truly non-prejudicial. when you can look at all of them and see the value and not give preference to any of them, to see them all as like the same kind of thing. I think that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you're right. Christianity, we do live in a very Christian culture in the sense that is our kind of our primary mythology.
Yeah. Even like the common terms we use, like rule of thumb, or I don't know if that one exactly is, but if you look, so much of the common phrases and things that we use, they're like kind of based in the Bible. They're like from Bible quotes and stuff.
Yeah.
It's just, and you don't even realize it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think that the problem is when people start looking at myth as literal and as concrete.
Yeah, definitely.
Because as soon as you lose the symbolic, you've killed something really important.
Yeah, and I remember talking to like fundamentalist Christian people I worked with, and it was like, if Jesus, if Jesus didn't happen, then the whole Christianity is not real. It's not anything. And it's like, that's not true to me. It's the opposite is true. It's like the message is what's real. The truth of it is what's real, not the physicality of it.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons I always say that I have a Gnostic turpitude, because I always like some of the Gnostic texts because they focused on the Christ as metaphor. And
no, the Gnostics were
what's inside.
Yeah. That's how, if things had gone on a good path, the culture would be a Gnostic Christian based culture, and things would be much better, I think, in the world.
Yeah. We were really close to that.
Yeah.
We were really, really close to that.
Yeah.
Probably closer than what most people understand.
Yeah. I read a bit about it in the 90s, the Gnostic Gospels. There was like a thing in the 90s that kind of got, there was a few books that came out, I think.
Yeah. The Nag Hammadi texts were discovered in 1945. I think the major collection came out maybe in the 90s, maybe a little bit earlier, but that's when it became a little bit more popular, I think.
Right.
And it kind of made its way into some films, especially films in the 90s, like Bricks and the Truman Show.
Right.
And Blade Runner, even Philip K. Dick was really big on.
Yeah. Philip K. Dick was amazing.
Yeah, he was. So I know that in the book, it's interesting, and I thought that maybe this might help kind of explore this idea of dark arts, and I think that dark arts is a perfect name.
Good.
for what's going on here. But who were some of your influences? I have a list here, but I wanted to ask you.
Okay. Probably the earliest influence I can think of is Escher, MC Escher. And my aunt had like a kind of European sensibility. She had like a lot of cool art books like Dali and Escher, and her whole style. The rest of the family is a little more like working class, common folks who, from San Pedro. But I used to walk home from school and go to her house sometimes, or stop by her house, and she always had these really cool art books. That got me really interested in Escher and Dali and Francis Bacon, I remember seeing. But as far as like when I became more able to choose the artists, to seek out artists on my own as I got older, it was Frazetta was the big one, Frank Frazetta. And I always call him my first favorite artist, because I just was like, got so into his work, because he's amazing. And then it was Giger, H.R. Giger was the next one that was just like, whoa, completely paradigm shift for me to see that kind of stuff presented as fine art was like really amazing to me.
Yeah, and I think that he's one of the first ones. If someone says dark art, he may be one of the first artists to come to mind.
Yeah, he's kind of,
if not you, Chet.
maybe I'm of a new generation, but yeah, no, he's kind of like the godfather. Him and Beksinski. I don't know if have you ever seen Beksinski?
I have a friend on Facebook that is constantly posting artwork of Beksinski.
Yeah. His stuff is. If you look into his work, he was so prolific. He produced way more work than Giger did.
Wow.
And it's like still I see new pieces and I've seen them all. And it's like someone will find a new one. I mean, I'm not comparing them really. They're both like great artists of that time that were doing dark art before it was cool or before it was dark art even. But he was, he didn't work on a Hollywood movie and get an Oscar for it. That's kind of why he didn't come into public consciousness until I think the early 2000s maybe. And people didn't know about Beksinski, not that many. Now he's a little more popular. Now he's like all the AI art looks like Beksinski because I think he has so much work and they used it to train their AI programs. Right. But yeah, check out his stuff because he was amazing. Just totally unassuming Polish dude, totally normal looking guy too.
Yeah. I definitely see similarities between his work and your work, actually.
I'm super influenced by Beksinski, no doubt about it.
Yeah,
I had to be aware of it when I was starting because when you're starting and you don't have your own style, you kind of have to like pull from your influences and I was very aware of it. And I know I was biting a bit of Beksinski, a bit of Giger, but I was always aware of it. It's like, okay, I got to make this my own. I got a little too close that time. Next time, I'm not going to do that, but that's a thing artists go through, I think, when they're first starting out.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that is true in pretty much any kind of artistic medium.
Yeah,
like oil paints or writing or music.
Anything creative.
Start with the influence.
You gotta, it's like nobody creates from nothing. It just doesn't happen. You can't, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah. And it's all a matter of finding your voice, finding your
own. And that's that's the standing on the shoulders of giants thing. It's like each generation has to help the next generation, and it's their responsibility to find their own voice using that influence and not just rip them off, and then and it's every artist, it's kind of your responsibility for the next generation to do good work and inspire them and make sure your work is like right and you're not slacking so that you're teaching them right. And then it's their responsibility to do the same and find their own voice in it and then like kind of keep going with it, I think.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. So I have this list of your influences. I forget where I got this. It was either your website or Wikipedia. But there's one that I didn't know who it was, but as soon as I found out his artwork, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And that was John Singer Sargent, who was a portrait artist.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, every painter loves John Singer Sargent because he was like the ultimate portrait painter. And but he, it wasn't until I was doing this stuff for a while that I was like, oh, he's you can't get any better than Sargent.
Yeah,
he's a master at it. But it wasn't like that didn't get me to paint monster portraits. It was more the other way around. It's like, oh, I'm doing that too.
Yeah.
And I started learning about as I was painting, because I was kind of self-taught for the most part. The more I was learning about it, the more I was having an appreciation for that style of painting. Up to when I was growing up, it's like it seemed stuffy and boring and dry. And as you become an adult and you realize, wow, that's incredible. It's just like a taste thing. Your taste develops as you get older. But probably more than Sargent, that I don't give enough credit to for doing these portraits is Basil Gogos, who did the famous Monsters of Filmland covers of, I don't know if you remember Famous Monsters magazine from the 70s. It was like the first horror movie he did. If you look up Famous Monsters and you see the covers, you'll be like, oh, okay. Because this guy would paint, Christopher Lee as Frankenstein. He would paint all the classics in a portrait style, but he would use really weird colors because it was the 70s, I guess, just to make them weird. He'd use like these weird kind of garish colors that were super cool. But those were probably the biggest unconscious influence on me doing portraits, more than Sargent, I think, as far as hitting me when I didn't know Sargent when I was a kid, but
right. Yeah. Well, I kind of want to go back to that, but I also wanted to ask, because
someone listed in the influences was Norman Rockwell.
Oh yeah, so amazing.
Yeah. And I think my initial response was, is he being ironic?
No. No, Norman Rockwell was so amazing. It is like his just, it's like I aspired to that level of technical ability
Yeah.
because he was just such a great painter. But even, for what he was doing, which is kind of the opposite of what I'm doing in a way, the whole American apple pie thing. He was doing it as an artist. That was his thing, and he was nailing it, and he was doing it perfectly. So, like, as an artist, whereas that's not my message with my art, I could still appreciate that he was successful with his message, his thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Well, you know what? I thought about it. My first thought was, is Chet being ironic? And then the next thought was, oh, David Lynch.
Yeah, that's true.
Because Lynch he presents this sort of Norman Rockwell vision,
right?
But then he rips away the cover,
right.
You see the monstrous.
That's true. But it's like I really do have a genuine love for his work, and I think there's so many great artists out there. You don't list them all. You get interviewed, and you answer the ones that come to mind. And then you mentioned Norman Rockwell of a bunch of artists you could mention, because that is the weirdest one I could like. That's so the least like what I'm doing. So it's, from a kind of ironic in that way, I guess. It's more like, oh, I'll mention this one because it's more interesting, even though I love whatever. So, Francis Bacon as well, but that seems more obvious. But yeah, I love Norman Rockwell for his technique more than anything. I mean, this stuff like perfect. Yeah. The poses and the expressions are just like, especially in the expressions. I have a lot of weird expressions on some of my characters, and he just nails them. It's like slightly exaggerated, but still super realistic.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
Yeah. When I like that in your work, that in some of them, there's clearly this sense of humor.
Yeah.
Some of them. I apologize. I forget the title, but there's a mushroom cloud.
Oh yeah. It's going like that.
Yeah. And he's got the thumbs up. And I just found that one just very funny. And it's like, I think I know people who are like that.
Yeah, that's I mean, my one thing, my parents used to, my mom and my stepdad, they would always laugh when I showed them a new painting, like in a good way. Like they liked it and they thought it was funny. And yeah, I think I think they're funny too. My friend Gabe Leonard, he's an amazing, really amazing painter. He that's what he always says when he's asked about my work. He's like, I think they're hilarious. I think they're funny, So I'm not like intentionally putting in humor to soften the blow or anything. It's just a natural part of my personality, I guess, or I don't know. If it seems like a good idea, I just do it. And sometimes that idea is it's funny.
Yeah.
I don't know. I use like these monsters as like the base. Like, most artists traditionally will try and get like points across or try and express emotion. And they just use the human figure as the base, as the whatever their culture. If it's usually like white people, especially for like, white men painters. It's like, beautiful white women or whatever. And that's the base. And then they come up with the emotion, and they use that as kind of like, how am I going to mold this and turn it and make it express the feeling I want to express. And I'm just using like monsters as the base.
Right.
So it's like, I'll try and create a sense of empathy or whatever, or fear or funny, something funny. They're all, because they are like, to me, they're like people.
Mm-hmm.
It's cool though, because there is, you do kind of, you don't have that baggage that comes with it, like the racial thing at all.
Right.
It's more of a more people can relate to it, I think, because they're not like, most of the creatures can't tell if they're of a certain race. It's more like the race they are is dead. They're part of the dead race.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and many of them aren't, I mean, there's a lack of humanness. I don't want to say a lack of humanity, but a lack of humanness.
Right. Yeah. It just seems like you can kind of still make the same point in a unique way, and then not have all the, cultural baggage that comes along with it as well.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. And so looking at this book, the Dystopia, and this world that you've created, I noticed a couple of things, and I want to ask you about these. And one, I think you answer in the documentary, but I want to ask anyway. The repetition of 5.
Yes.
Because it appears in a lot of the paintings.
Yes. Well, the 5 is, it's ultimately, the quick answer is it's my lucky number. That's the easy answer. The real answer is that it was a number I was given when I was going through my big spiritual awakening, and when I was like 18. And that was, well, as talked about in the documentary, it involved a Ouija board and LSD and mushrooms for all the right reasons. Again, I always give that disclaimer. I was not a partier. I was on the path. I wanted to know God. I wanted to experience that. And that's why I did it. And, it was like a number given to me by this, whatever it was we were communicating with on the Ouija board, the number 5. And it was like a spiritual name. It was like a spiritual name in a way, like being given a new name, kind of, And so at least I took it as the symbol for, like, I tattooed it. I got it on my shoulder in a triangle, which is why Dystopia is an upside down triangle. It was like, I'm not going to forget this experience because it was so life-changing, and it was sort of like, you go through experiences, you have a big spiritual awakening, and it's like, okay, you have to do good in the world. You have to be a good person. You're not going to be a bad person. You're not going to screw this. Life is precious. You need to live your purpose, blah, blah. And so it was a way of like committing to that, getting it tattooed, so I would never forget it. And I just put it in the paintings for that reason, I guess, just to not forget. And it's more like something I'm doing for myself in a way.
Okay.
Now people like, oh, I got one with a 5 in it, like, oh, I want to get that one. It's got a 5 in it.
Yeah, I can see why they would want to do that. And, and with me, I immediately wanted to start looking at like the symbolism of 5.
Well, that's what I did after it happened. I was like, I started looking at it, and it's like, yeah, there's all kinds of 5s that are, resonate with me on a spiritual level.
Right.
There's all kinds of stuff in different cultures spiritually. So, but it was, it was also, it was a lot of things. It was like when my dad left, and my parents got divorced, I was 5. It was when everything went bad for me as a kid. Like, everything was good up to that point, and then there's this blank space where I got all screwed up from the experience and couldn't remember it because it was so painful. And so it was I guess a step to addressing that, and I don't know, reclaiming that in a way, in a positive way. I don't know, because I eventually ended up going to therapy after that, maybe 5 or 6 years later, and then dealing with all that stuff. But that was the main kind of reason, I think, that it was given in the first place, was like, this is when your trauma happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and 5 is kind of traumatic. I mean, not to diminish what you went through, but when I think about it, it's like, that's when you first start. I think it's like when that sense of self first really comes into focus.
Yeah.
When you start having the first like chain of memories.
Right.
Because I can remember like just flashes before that.
Right.
But 5, that's where I'm like, yeah, I can remember a lot. So, okay, now life is going forward.
Right. Yeah. You become like more self-aware, maybe, you know?
Yeah.
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 Interesting. I never thought about it.
Yeah. When I was also thinking in terms of, and this is just me thinking out loud, kind of in terms of 5 and kind of in the context of what you're doing in Dystopia, in the sense that you talk, it's mentioned in Dystopia that there's this idea of a fall.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of connecting 5 to the fall in the sense of I do tarot card. I read tarot,
Me too.
and 4 is always kind of the number of completion.
Right.
But then 5 is that first, okay, now you've had too much, and there's
Yeah.
initial fall, right? And so I was
Right.
connecting 5 to that sort of fall,
Yeah,
which
that's
also
cool.
seems to speak to your experience.
Yeah. But again, it's like, I don't know. I couldn't have made that up.
Yeah,
I couldn't have come up with that if I was trying. There's
right.
no way. I'm not that smart. It's like I feel like I feel like I have a pretty high form of intelligence if it's through art.
Hmm.
Like there's something going on there that I have that's kind of special.
Yeah.
But it's like this weird inner thing, and the only way I can use it is through the artwork. I can't, it's not like, I could never get a degree like you. I just couldn't do it. It's like so I feel like I feel dumb kind of, but I know that I'm not in this other way. I'm like smart in this other way, but it's a weird thing because it's not verbal. It's like a weird form of communication, which is what art is. It's like a way of communicating that's nonverbal. So, but that's what was so cool about Dystopia is like, yeah, I couldn't have come up with this if I tried. And just you talking about the 5, I didn't think of that until you said it. It's like totally true.
Yeah.
It's just a trip, and that to me, that's magic. That's like,
Yeah.
that's the exciting thing is when you're able to be a part of something like that, and those moments you realize, hey, oh yeah, you reminded all the time, yeah, magic's real. I always forget it.
Yeah, for sure. So another question is, and I don't know if you can answer this question.
Okay.
And so it may be unfair. I hope it's not, but Dystopia documents this world that you've created.
Mhm.
And you've mentioned the influence of like Joseph Campbell and the idea of follow your bliss.
Mhm.
And there's this theme of a fall in Dystopia. And there are some of these figures, characters, or what, there's like oracles, and you have these interlopers and everything. And as I'm looking at all of this, I'm like, there's a story. There's like some story. And so when I saw that you liked that, the quote from Campbell, Campbell's always known as the, for the hero's journey.
Mhm.
And so the question I had was, in this context of Dystopia, this world you created, who's the hero?
Black magic is the hero to me.
Is he?
He's
Okay.
like the anti-hero kind of guy.
Right.
And there is a story that I didn't put in the book. It's like, as Mike was interviewing me about this stuff, clearly, as we were coming up with everything, there was a story developing in tandem with it that I kept track of, essentially, and it's like the interlopers are the bad guys and black magic is the good guy, and everybody else is just like every other dumbass in the world going about their lives kind of in a daze. You know what I mean? And then there's like these unusual characters here and there that stick out, that help, that hurt other, bad. There's like other kind of independent bad guys. But to me, black magic is the good guy, that used to be a bad guy.
Okay.
He's like kind of a redeemed hero, sort of like an anti-hero that used to be really bad. So this is Dystopia is just like laying this groundwork for the really fun stuff, which is telling the story,
Right.
and, just making a TV Netflix series or a, not maybe most likely it's odds are small that it would happen, but I still want to try. I'm shooting for something like that.
Okay.
If it only ends up as a comic book series, I could do that. I could do a comic book on my own. I'm so used to doing everything on my own because that's how I've, it's only been the only option for me is just to kind of do it on my own because what I'm doing is so niche and weird that I've never, there's never really been any corporate interest in what I'm doing, but that's kind of the ultimate goal because I think the story would be so cool. It's just something I would want to see. I would love to see those paintings come to life.
Yeah, I would too. And a story started forming as I was looking at the book.
Oh, cool.
And I don't even remember. I wish I did, but there was one instance where I even thought, like, oh, well, this is the beginning of the story. And it was a connection with our world and dystopia.
Yeah.
Sort of a temporary moment of interaction,
Yeah, right. Yeah, there is a connection, and it's like I don't want to talk about it because it's like it's still, I don't want to let the secret out yet because but it's so cool, and it's like I can't wait to develop it because it is such a cool idea, but it does cross over. And the whole time writing the book, we treated it like it was a real place. It was like important to make sure that that we didn't add anything or that I didn't make stuff up,
right?
Which is weird for a fantasy book. But it was like I started elaborating on things and being like, what, that wasn't painted. That's not. I don't know that that's true. It didn't show up in a painting. If it shows up in a painting, I know that when I paint, I'm doing it like naturally and purely. And if it shows up in a painting, then it's real. If it doesn't, then there's a chance I just made it up. So we only use the real stuff from the paintings. So it was really strange. I bet you there's never been a book written like this before.
Yeah, I can't think of one.
And that's kind of amazing when you think about it. But it wasn't intentional. It was just like,
yeah. And so in the writing of the book, the process was, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but this is something that if I remember right, you explained in a previous conversation, is that Mike Carell would like show these pictures and then ask you, well, what is this? What's going on here?
Yeah. He would interview me about every single painting that he could, basically every painting I've ever done. And once, he would take all the information I told him about each painting, what I knew for sure, because there was things I knew for sure that I didn't even know that I knew until he asked me about them, which was totally like shocking to me. Like I didn't even realize I knew that about it. I never thought about it. I never verbalized it. And then there was things that I thought maybe I kind of knew. And then there was things I had no idea. And then we just left that stuff out. Even the maybe stuff we didn't put in. So we only put the for sure stuff in. And then, but that's all we needed. And that's, it was so important, like, again, to keep it true and real. And, my point that I was going to say was we treated it like like a real dimension that exists. And just for the sake of, Mike is more, I was like, I can't believe that that's true, but he's a little more out there than I am with that stuff. So he's like, I think it's a real place. But I was like, I'll, basically play along. And, it is kind of a real place in a way. It's an imaginal realm that exists in my imagination, I guess. But as one of the rewards for the Kickstarter, I made a Ouija board, a Dystopia Ouija board, because I love Ouija boards. I think they're so cool. Like, the 70s, man, everybody had a Ouija board. That was a thing in the 70s and the late 60s. And
so I have mine.
You have your original one that you had when you were a kid?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, that's so cool. I wish I had my original. I've got a few hanging around, but no, I don't have my original one.
Yeah, in the movie you had a really interesting one, not the standard.
Yeah, I think it was the Mystic Tray. I've got one up here that's like a Swami board, and then I had one called a Mystic Tray that was from the 40s, but I accidentally stepped on it and it broke it. It was really cool. But so I made this Ouija board, and I don't even know that if the people who bought it, they mightn't even know the idea behind it. I've said it in interviews here and there, but it's like, I'm not that famous to where everybody knows everything that's going on with me, so but the idea was like you can use the Ouija board to talk to the characters in Dystopia. And I thought that was the coolest idea, even if it's not anything other than just like a fantasy thing. It's still, the idea is so cool. And I think that you could probably use it and get something from it. And it's like, who knows what, but I think that's so cool. That idea that there's a way that people can communicate with characters in this world using this Ouija board.
Wow. Yeah, I like that too. That is
isn't that cool?
Yeah, it is. That's incredibly cool, and it's very unique as well.
It's like, it's a totally inspired idea. It's just like, oh my god, it was in it because it started off as like, I want to make a Ouija board for a reward. That's it. And then I was like, oh shit, you could talk to the characters through the Ouija board. That'd be amazing. So, but again, it's like, I don't even know if anybody. I'm sure they're just using it like art pieces and hanging them up because they just look cool. But I don't know. I got too many ideas.
You know what that reminds me of, or what it kind of brings to mind, is almost like manifesting this world, manifesting dystopia.
Right.
And, I don't know if you're familiar with the Philip experiment.
I don't think so. Not
It
by that
was
name.
It was done back in the 70s, and I believe it was a group of Canadian parapsychologists. And what they did is they made a ghost.
No way.
Yeah, they made a ghost, and you can look this up on YouTube. There are some videos of it.
Wow.
And so they created this entire backstory. So they came up with the name and the whole backstory of this character named Philip.
That's so cool.
And then what they did is they would hold seances. And nothing much happened until like a year later, things started happening. The table started levitating. It would move around the room.
That's crazy. That's like the tulpas, right? Or servitors, in magic, where you are. Yeah, that is a trip, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it seems like, communicating with these characters via Ouija board, it's kind of doing the same thing,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Which,
yeah. Maybe I should have put some safeguards in there or some instructions at least.
Right.
I mean, I thought
points or something.
Yeah. I mean, I've thought about, this is like my life's work. Dystopia is my life's work. It's the thing. That's why I'm like, I gotta be I want to be careful about it. I don't want to like sell it to some movie company.
Right.
It's like it'll either get done right or it won't get done in my lifetime, because it's that important to me. It's like everything to me. It's my thing, my one thing. And I've just, because then it's like I'm thinking of all kinds of cool things that you could do for it, VR,
right?
Games, video games, a card game like Magic the Gathering. But I was thinking, it would be cool, would be just as a fun thing to do, is be to come up with a magical system based, Dystopia magical system.
Wow.
Okay. Like, because just like kind of like in a chaos magic approach, just as a fun artistic thing to do, it'd be so cool. Because it's like, if the principles of magic are what I think most people that are in understand it, it doesn't matter. It's really, it's coming, you're making it happen. And the magic rituals and stuff are just techniques to get in touch with that part of yourself that makes it happen.
Right.
Yeah.
I like that aspect in like chaos magic, where you use what is useful to you,
right?
Because ultimately you're working with symbols anyway, and kind of channeling those energies through the symbols. So if praying to Artemis is your thing, go for it. Or if it's praying to Buffy, go for it.
Right. Yeah, one of those might have more energetic charging from years of use, but maybe not. What they always say that, like, because when I first found out about chaos magic, I was like, oh yeah, you could get favors from Scooby-Doo or whatever. And what a fun idea. And then the guy I took magic classes from, Jason Louv, he was like, well, you use the standard, the old gods, because they've been used for millennia. People have been using them, so they have more resonance and more energy. But then I was thinking, you know what? That may not be true, because think about how few people throughout the years have used those gods or whatever and given it that energy compared to now. How many people have seen Scooby-Doo?
Right.
It's like, it's probably a lot more energy to the pop culture things. Have, when you look at how many people, because it's like, magic was a niche thing for forever, or, it was like an underground thing where you had to like, and even back when it was in popular use, there just wasn't that many people in the world like there is.
Yeah, no, that's an outstanding point, because there's just so many of us now.
Yeah.
And what's more important, is it the duration or the number of people that are using it?
Right. So I don't know. So it's just got me thinking. It's like, man, maybe because I was thinking it'd just be cool to make your own up.
Yeah.
But as far as I mean, in a sense, if that, if Dystopia becomes a huge thing and gets made into a movie, you could do that. And that you could get, in contact with black magic.
Yeah.
Now that he's a good guy.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's, with the internet age that we're living in, things like memes and whatnot.
Right. Yeah.
Viral. I think that's a very potent source of magical powers. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen that documentary on Hulu? It's called I want to say Meme Magic or something. I mean, it's about the whole, you should watch it. It's not a great documentary, but it's good. And it, it talks about the whole thing about the whole 4chan meme magic getting Trump elected, and that whole, because a lot of people think that they were using chaos magic with memes in order to, so it's insane, scary.
Yeah, and I've had that sense that there was black magic at play with that.
Well, that and it's if it got to me, it was like, okay, now I see why these people were keeping it secret, because it is potentially dangerous in the wrong hands. You get a bunch of crazy people, nihilistic kids who hate their lives, and and they somehow get together. I mean, it felt also like, to me, that felt like a perfect storm, and it also, like, it was sort of like it was just the time for it to happen. Everything lined up right for that to happen. But still, it's crazy.
Yeah. So we need dark art in dark times.
Yeah. that's what I say.
Yeah.
That's I'm like a dark art evangelist, because we all feel in dark art like we are the marginalized art community. No one takes us seriously. Blue Chip Gallery would never take us seriously. It's just, they just don't take us seriously. You have to do, modern art. You have to do stuff like that to be taken seriously with the academia and stuff in the art world, on the blue chip art world. But so I'm like, I feel like I'm an evangelist for this kind of stuff. So I'm always speaking about it and promoting it. And so one of the things I like to say is that I feel like it's one of the most, like a sales point, a sales pitch point that I give to people, is it's the most appropriate art for the times we live in.
Yeah.
It expresses, I think, how most people feel more than any other art form I could think of, at least visual art form, because everyone's feeling anxiety and fear and hopelessness.
Yeah.
And like everything's out of control. And it's like, this is the time for us. That's why I tell all the other dark artists, this is our time. So you got to make some great art.
Yeah. Well, and that feeds in. This will be my last question for you.
Okay.
I'm having a really good time with the conversation, but I think,
good.
for the virtue of the listeners and
yes,
I ask guests, and I don't ask every guest this, but since what you just said, I'm like, yes, I need to ask this anyway, because one of the themes often in my podcast is our ecological crises that we're facing and just the world at large. So I always like to ask them, do you have hope? So I want to ask you, do you have hope, Chet?
I I totally have hope. Sometimes I feel like I shouldn't, and and sometimes I feel like I I can't explain it,
Mm.
but I do feel maybe it's because okay, if you have like a true faith in, okay, if you think that, what I think is that God, I'm like I forget the term where it's like God is everything.
Pantheistic.
Pantheistic, kind of. It's like that was what I got out of all my experiences with magic, with psychedelics, with all my, Eastern philosophy. It was like there's nothing outside of God.
Mm.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be the ultimate thing. You
Right.
can't have the ultimate thing and then have something outside of it. Then it's not the ultimate thing. Then it's lacking that thing.
Right.
It's just common sense. So it's like, to me, it's this is God, and there's nothing to worry about because this is all God. End of story. It's like you don't have to be afraid of dying.
Hmm.
You don't have to be afraid of anything because you're already God. You are part of God. You are God. Everything is God. And that's it. That's just what I think is true. I just think that's the ultimate reality. And it's like, it doesn't help me when I stub my toe or, I got stomach flu or something.
Yeah.
But I can't see. To me, it's like, I don't know. I feel like I know that that's true, even though it sounds arrogant or something. But to me, I feel like that's absolutely the truth.
Right.
And how can you be afraid or worried that anything's going wrong when it's all God?
Right.
And if it seems horrible the way things seem now, then there's like, I don't know. It sounds trite, but I do kind of believe that the birth pangs idea, it's like birth is a whole painful and bloody and ugly, and a new life comes from it.
Mhm.
And I really do think that that's where we're at.
Yeah.
I don't know, who knows how long it'll take, but
Right.
it could be like, things are so fast now, it could be in a year,
Yeah.
but it could be in 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with pretty much everything you just said. And
Good. Let's start a church.
yeah.
We can make a bunch of money.
Yeah. Don't think I haven't thought about it.
I
Every
think
now and then.
everybody does at some point.
Yeah, every now and then I'll say something in a specific way, and one of my oldest friends will just look at me and say, "You could make millions."
That's the thing, though. It's like people that really think that would never do something like that. That's the irony,
Yeah.
unless you're a sociopath.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, I don't, the question for me, with God, it's always, well, how are you defining God? And
Yeah.
I tend to look at it as this sort of primary or foundational consciousness.
Yeah. That's
And
a
I
good,
think that
perfect.
we're all that,
Yeah.
and I know that there's this idea of that we're all just God wanting to experience God. So God wants to know what it's like to stub his toe.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
to stub its toe, or,
Yep. Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's that kind of game, it's like we're God playing the hide and seek game.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you think about it, it's a cool game.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm gonna hide from myself and then discover that I'm really God at the end.
Yeah.
And then I win, and then everybody wins. It's amazing.
Yeah. I like that. Kind of gives God a sort of a sense of humor right there.
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, this is when anybody that's had experience with psychedelics, is one thing that you get is like the cosmic giggle, they call it, or the cosmic wink. It's like, yeah, God has a sense of humor. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that cosmic giggle.
Yeah. Yeah. You go like, oh yeah. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Life's amazing.
Yeah. And I also agree that we are experiencing birth pains.
Yeah.
And,
See, I think that, and you feel weird saying it because things seem so hopeless right now and so ugly, but I feel again, it's like, you almost feel like, oh, I'm saying something cliche by saying it, but it feels that way to me. Just feels that way to me.
Yeah. No, I think it is. And I think we often forget, I think a lot of people like to think of birth as, right after birth where everyone's holding the baby. Oh, so cute.
Oh yeah,
Forget that birth is a bloody affair with much screaming and gnashing of teeth.
It's like the worst pain ever, like
Yeah.
the worst pain you could experience.
Yeah. And
And
I
then
think that's where we are.
yeah, right. Yeah, and think about the 9-month.
Right.
That's not very comfortable either. Carrying the fetus for 9 months. It's like, so I could see, maybe I'm wrong, but I could see, like, you look at the arc of history and like, yeah, that was the gestation period, and and this is the birth happening, and I don't know. I don't know. I just believe it. I just feel it. I feel it in my bones.
Yeah. Well, through this process, what I think is so important is we don't need a lot of academics. What we need is a lot of storytellers and visionaries and artists. And, so I think that, you are a excellent guide for us.
Oh,
during these
thanks.
dark times. So with that
Appreciate it.
said, I really hope that Dystopia gets turned into a series or movie or something.
Me too.
That would be amazing and absolutely incredible.
I just want to see it.
Yeah. Well, I'm anxiously away. It just screams to me that that's the next step.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Have you seen Love, Death, and Robots?
Oh yeah.
Imagine that's how I saw that, and I was like, oh my God, I saw it. I've seen it. Because they can make it look exactly like my paintings. Because there's a few stories in there that are like painterly. They're CG, but they're painterly. It's like, now I know it can be done. I can see it. So now I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to manifest it somehow.
Yeah. Well, we'll ask everyone in the audience, to help manifest that.
Yes.
Because I think it would be absolutely incredible.
Me too. I think
so. Here's a question. I lied. I said
no problem.
So Dystopia, it's volume 1.
Yes.
Are you working on volume 2?
I haven't started, but as much of as hellish as it was, we didn't include every painting. I left out so many paintings. There's so much more work. There's easily enough for a volume 2. And the hard part was figuring out like the format of the book. That's what took. I couldn't see it. I couldn't get it. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I'm just not that way. So it was like, 3.5 years of me going, I don't know what to do, and like thinking about it and trying to do it and not being able to put it in a format. And then finally it clicked for me, and I was like, oh, okay, this is how we do it. And then it was easy. So now the book is laid out, so we could it would be easy to do volume 2 basically. So I'm not working on it, but every painting, that's another cool thing about Dystopia is every time I make a painting, the world gets bigger.
Yeah.
And all I have to do is just paint what I think is cool. It's so much fun. It's like these guys, these zombie death bots. I'm doing this show for Copro Gallery. It's opening on the 8th of October. The idea is that they are robots. If you've made a robot using cadaver parts, that was the idea, because it just seemed like a fun idea. Just seemed like a fun idea. And I was like, wow, okay, so what are those? How do they figure in Dystopia? Because they're definitely in Dystopia. So it's a new piece of the puzzle. So I feel like the more I paint, the bigger the world gets, and I'll just never run out of. It'll just keep getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to do volume 2 for sure, but I'm not there yet.
Okay. So you've got a show at Copro Gallery. That's in Santa Monica.
Yeah, at Bergamot Station, which is a big collection of art galleries over there.
Okay. And that starts October 8th.
Yeah. And I think it's up for 3 or 4 weeks. Okay. And it's free, so people can go see it.
All right, yeah. I'll definitely go check it out, especially now that Light Rail will take you straight to Santa Monica.
Yeah. It drops you off right at the gallery. It's funny. Perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. So where can people get a copy of Dystopia?
You can go to my, you can go get everything from my website, which is just chetzar.com, or you can go to chetzar.bigcartel.com and order the book. And at this point, that's the only place you can get the book. Totally independently done. I don't know what I'm doing. I probably should be selling on Amazon or something, but at this point, it's just like I'm just selling directly to my fan base.
Well, you don't need to make Jeff Bezos any richer.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. It's like, why bother? You
Yeah,
know?
it is a glorious book. I mean, it's so well done,
Oh,
and
thanks.
it's a great collection. And it really, it sparked my imagination.
Oh, cool.
I think that's what you know most artists want, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's like the ultimate compliment.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
appreciate that. That's
yeah, of
great to hear.
of course. Well, Chet, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thanks for having me on. I had a great, excellent time. I'll like to come on again. You got to come on my podcast too.
Will do anytime. So
Excellent.
yeah, we'll definitely keep in touch, and I'll leave it at that. And just remind everyone, if you're in Southern California, go to the showing at Copro Gallery and get a copy of Dystopia Volume 1.
Yes, I'll be doing a signing there too,
Okay.
as well as
wonderful.
showing my new work.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So, all right. Well, Chet, I will speak with you again very, very soon.
And that's a wrap on episode 55 of Rebel Spirit Radio. Thank you so much for listening or watching if you are part of my YouTube audience or watch this on Spotify. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to give it a positive rating on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. It only takes a second, and your 5-star ratings really do help, especially if you listen on Apple. If you have a minute to spare, please consider posting a short but positive review. And please consider subscribing. For those viewing on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you will be informed when I upload new content. Also, if you think a friend or family member or coworker even would like this podcast, please share it with them. Right now, that is one of the best ways to help me with the podcast. I really would like to grow my audience. If you would like to support my work on Rebel Spirit Radio, I also have a PayPal link set up if you would like to make a one-time donation. And yes, you can still be the first person to do so. The first person who does so will get a special call out, if you are okay with that, and you'll have my undying gratitude. You can find the PayPal link in the show notes or video description. I will also be launching a Patreon within the next few weeks, so keep tuned for an update on that. I have big plans for Rebel Spirit beyond the Rebel Spirit Radio podcast. I really would like to create more video content for the YouTube channel, including more book reviews, educational videos on topics concerning spirituality, the history of religion, and the religious response to the climate crisis. I'm also planning some live stream episodes. The first will be with returning guest Dr. Sharon Kogan, where she will be offering a Jungian analysis interpretation of dreams for participants. That's probably going to end up being sometime in November, maybe early December. We've already recorded a preliminary episode that'll be released in a few weeks. So be sure to follow Rebel Spirit Radio on Facebook and or sign up for the newsletter at rebelspiritradio.com so you can be informed of all future live events. Implementing all of this is going to take time and resources, so anything you can do to help will be greatly appreciated. I'm Nick Mather, and you've been listening to Rebel Spirit Radio. Until next time, may you be in peace, may you flourish in all possible ways, and may you continue to nurture your rebel spirit.